Mendicino, pourquoi la GRC, pourquoi la sécurité publique n'ont pas inclus dans le contrat pour le système de filtrage pour la GRC des critères de sécurité? Comment pouvez-vous expliquer ça?
Mais tout d'abord, il faut renforcer et répéter que nos yeux sont toujours ouverts sur les menaces causées par des acteurs hostiles. Ça, c'est la raison pourquoi il y a des protocoles dans le contexte des contrats. Il y a un processus où il y a une évaluation de les menaces, y compris des menaces causées par l'ingérence étrangère. Je sais qu'il y a le rapport ce matin qui exprimait quelques inquiétudes sur le processus. Ça, c'est la raison que j'avais demandé à mes fonctionnaires pour examiner en collaboration avec PSPC les détails de le contrat. Mais on va rester toujours en garde de les menaces causées par les ingérences étrangères.
Selon les critères que vous dites qu'il existe pour évaluer la menace, est-ce que ce contrat-là a respecté les règles? Est-ce que c'était normal, selon vous, qu'il n'y ait pas de critères de sécurité inclus dans ce contrat-là spécifiquement?
Mais la raison pour l'existence de ces critères est pour protéger nos intérêts nationaux, pour protéger la sécurité nationale canadienne. Et ça, c'est la raison que j'ai demandé maintenant à mes fonctionnaires pour regarder, étudier les détails de le contrat, y compris le processus, pour nous assurer que la protection que nous avons besoin maintenant est en place.
How and when are you going to change?
Will you ask the RCMP to end this contract with a company that has ties to China and is accused of espionage in the U.S.? Are you going to take that step?
Well, first I'll repeat what I said in French, now in English, and that is to say we're eyes wide open about the threats that are posed by hostile state and non-state actors, and that includes the PRC. One of the reasons why we put in place a process that looks at the potential opportunities or vectors for foreign interference in the context of contracts is to secure Canadian national interests, to secure our national security. And so what I have done in the light of this report is to instruct my officials to look very closely at the details of that contract and also to work with our officials to review the process by which this contract was awarded. It goes without saying that we need to be very vigilant about where the vectors of risk and foreign interference are occurring on a daily basis, and that is why we put this process in place around how contracts are awarded by PSPC and other branches. So we're in the process of looking at that contract and the process very, very carefully.
How could the U.S. have warned you guys about this 5 years ago and public safety found no issues about this company whatsoever? What explains that difference?
Well, that's a very fair question, and that's why we're going to take a look at both the process and the contract. But we're vigilant against the threats that are posed by hostile state actors, including PRC, including looking at how contracts are awarded, and obviously, we want to be sure that that process was followed very rigorously. I'll take the question from you,
How and when are you going to change the amendments to the gun bill?
Well, look, I'm going to come to the specifics of that question in just a moment, but yesterday I had the chance to grieve with the families of Kody in Montreal. I was there with the Prime Minister, and this was a very profound and difficult moment. It was the 33rd anniversary of the shooting tragedy at Polytechnique in Montreal. The reason why I say that is that it's important to remember why this government has taken the decisions that it has around responsible gun control, including the national assault rifle ban, which we put into place 2.5 years ago. We told Canadians very transparently that our goal was to get guns that were designed not for communities or for hunting, but rather to kill the maximum number of people in the shortest period of time on a battlefield. And that is a goal that we have been transparent about and consistent about, and will continue to be going forward. You ask about the process that is going on at committee. What I have said, what the Prime Minister has said, is that we're going to work with the members of that committee, parliamentarians of all stripes, to make sure the language of the bill in its final format, in its version, is consistent with the government's goals. And that is to say, not to target guns that are commonly used for hunting, but rather to go after those AR-15 style guns which have been used in far too many shooting tragedies in the country.
But if you meant that, then how did you table a bunch of amendments and a definition before the committee that many, many people say is far broader in scope than your original intention?
Well, first of all, this is an amendment that is approximately 374 pages in length. It includes a very precise, technical, intricate definition that aims to define what the thresholds are by way of objective criteria around force, around bore diameter, around semi-automatic capacity, but it also contemplates very clearly in the amendment, and it does require careful, thoughtful study, an exemption, a possibility for an exemptions list, so that any of those firearms which might have otherwise been caught by that definition can be protected as they are commonly used for hunting. And that is precisely the work that we are supporting the committee in doing right now.
Monsieur Mendicino, est-ce que vous allez changer l'amendement? Est-ce que vous allez modifier votre propre amendement?
Tout d'abord, il faut reconnaître que hier était le 33e anniversaire de la tragédie à Poly. J'étais là avec le Premier ministre et des autres collègues pour exprimer nos solidarités avec toutes les familles de les victimes, les survivants, quelques que je viens de connaître très bien. Par exemple, Nathalie Provost. Elle est une femme qui est tellement inspirante parce que malgré de tout le trauma, sa sens de perdu, elle est un champion de réforme qui est nécessaire pour augmenter le contrôle responsable pour les armes à feu, y compris les armes de saut qui étaient utilisées contre elle. Donc, notre dévouement est de continuer de travailler avec la communauté à Poly, de travailler avec tout le monde pour assurer que le but de le gouvernement, qui ne sont pas de cibler les propriétaires, les chasseurs, mais de cibler les armes de saut qui étaient utilisées à Poly, à Truro, Porte-Piquet-Truro, à des autres places pour assurer que cette arme de saut peut être ramenée.
Vous n'avez pas répondu à la question.
Mais écoute,
je vous ai demandé, est-ce que vous allez changer votre propre amendement? Puis vous avez parlé de Polytechnique hier. C'est intéressant, mais ce n'est pas la question.
Ce que je dis, et nous sommes toujours prêts pour travailler ensemble avec les membres de le comité qui étudient avec beaucoup d'attention sur les détails de la langue, sur l'amendement qui était proposé à la communauté. Et nous sommes ouverts pour créer un mécanisme d'exemption pour protéger les armes qui est utilisées dans une façon légitime pour les chasseurs, mais pour encore renforcer notre dévouement sur le ciblé des armes de saut qui est utilisé à Poly et des autres places.
Donc, vous gardez l'amendement, mais vous ajoutez une liste d'exemptions. Alors, au lieu d'avoir une liste d'interdiction, vous auriez une liste d'exemptions? Vous fonctionnez... Ça serait l'inverse?
Ça, c'est exactement le processus que les membres de le comité sont en train d'étudier, et nous restons ouverts pour recevoir la version finale de la projet de loi. Merci.
Merci.
OK.
Alors, on a appris par mes collègues de Radio-Canada, Margot Debout, que la GRC a octroyé un contrat à une entreprise qui est dirigée par une entité chinoise pour un contrat de communication qui... On sait que les communications devraient être sécurisées, que c'est
Vous avez raison.
Comment se fait-il qu'on ait permis ça?
On doit enquêter. J'ai vu comme vous la nouvelle ce matin. Vous savez, je suis arrivé de l'Allemagne hier soir tard, mais j'ai vu la nouvelle. C'est sûr que c'est préoccupant, puis ça démontre à quel point on doit faire preuve de vigilance. Vous allez voir ce soir, on va présenter une conférence de presse, par exemple, sur la loi sur l'investissement au Canada, où on va resserrer les règles. Et puis là, je pense que quand on voit des épisodes comme celui-là, auxquels je n'ai pas le détail, c'est pour ça qu'on doit enquêter, mais certainement, ça démontre à quel point on doit être vigilant, parce que des choses comme ça ça ne devrait pas arriver. Alors là, il faut comprendre pourquoi et comment c'est arrivé. Et certainement, vous voyez, ce soir, on a pris plusieurs mesures pour être de plus en plus vigilants, mais ça démontre à quel point, encore là, on doit faire preuve de vigilance additionnelle. Puis ce soir, ce qu'on va présenter, ça va dans cette lignée-là, de mettre à jour, d'avoir des nouveaux outils pour mieux réagir aux changements géopolitiques qu'on voit présentement dans les terrains du Canada.
Est-ce qu'on devrait annuler ce contrat?
Écoutez, j'ai pas le détail. Je suis arrivé dans la nuit, j'ai vu ça, évidemment, ça dérange. Maintenant, il faut aller au fond des choses. Il faudra enquêter pour voir comment et pourquoi ça a été octroyé de cette façon-là. Je n'ai pas le détail, mais c'est certain que ça demande, comme je le disais, beaucoup de vigilance parce que on doit, dans un contexte géopolitique comme celui qu'on vit présentement, ce genre de choses-là, ça amène à plus de vigilance. Et comme je dis, ce soir, on va présenter un nouveau projet de loi pour mettre à jour la loi sur l'investissement au Canada. Ça va...
The U.S. was warning you guys about this company 5 years ago. What good is presenting new legislation now?
Like I said, well, there's two things. To modernize the Investment in Canada Act is the right thing to do because we want to protect our national economic interests. With respect to that particular contract, I just flew in from Germany yesterday evening, so I don't have all the details, but we need to investigate and we need to remain more vigilant to prevent things like that, understand the why and how something can happen at a moment where we know that we have to take care of geopolitical challenges with respect to China. So we need to be very mindful of what happened, and I think every branch of government needs to apply that level of scrutiny. Merci tout le monde.
Canada que la GRC a octroyé un contrat à une entreprise qui est une entité chinoise pour ses communications de radio qui sont supposées être sécurisées. C'est une entreprise qui, aux États-Unis, n'a plus le droit de faire affaire parce qu'il y a des risques à la sécurité nationale. Vous n'êtes peut-être pas au courant précisément de ce dossier-là, mais qu'est-ce que vous pensez du fait que la GRC permette un contrat avec une entreprise chinoise pour une différence de moins de 60 000 $ avec une entreprise québécoise?
La sécurité nationale est une priorité en absolu. C'est le ministre Mendicino et d'une certaine manière la ministre Anand qui vont s'en occuper. Mais en tant que gouvernement, la sécurité nationale est primordiale. Merci.
Il y a on a appris, vous pouvez le faire en français ou en anglais selon si vous êtes plus à l'aise, par Radio-Canada, que la GRC a octroyé un contrat à une entreprise chinoise pour gérer ses communications radio. On parle de communications hyper sensibles. Pour une entreprise qui a été barrée des États-Unis, pour laquelle on a été averti depuis des années que c'est problématique. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez du fait que la GRC ait tout de même offert ce contrat-là à une entreprise?
Oui, c'est important, je pense, de parler avec le ministre de la Sécurité publique sur ça. C'est pas mon dossier, mais je suis pas courante avec ça. Mais peut-être c'est important de parler avec le ministre de la Sécurité publique sur ça.
Autre chose, il y a une élection partielle lundi en Ontario. Oui. Comment pensez-vous que l'arrivée de Pierre Poilievre peut changer la donne pour cette élection partielle-là?
Oui, il va y avoir une élection partielle lundi et c'est un choix important pour les personnes qui habitent à Mississauga Lakeshore. Et je pense que j'ai eu la chance de faire de porte-à-porte là et j'ai parlé avec beaucoup de citoyens qui habitent dans le comté là. Et c'est clair que les personnes veulent les vraies réponses les questions de la probabilité. Et il y a beaucoup de rhétorique avec M. Poilievre, mais il n'y a pas des vraies solutions pour les problèmes qui existent ici au Canada, mais mondialement aussi. Alors, j'espère qu'il va y avoir un bon résultat là, et je pense que notre message est bien entendu dans le comté maintenant.
Merci beaucoup.
OK, merci beaucoup.
Et donc, il y a peut-être un changement dans le processus à venir, c'est ce qu'on comprend.
Mais je pense que depuis le début, on veut vraiment cibler les armes destinées à tuer des gens. Mm-hmm. Je comprends qu'il y a quelques armes, je ne connais rien dans l'air dans ça, je comprends qu'il y a quelques armes destinées à tuer des gens qui ont été conçues pour la guerre et qui sont utilisées pour la chasse. Je comprends qu'il y a une zone grise à ce niveau-là, mais ce qu'on veut cibler, nous autres, c'est vraiment les armes conçues pour tuer des gens conçus pour la guerre. Et la chasse,
Donc, il y a de l'écoute par rapport aux critiques que vous entendez. Ceux qui disent, il y a des armes peut-être qui sont utilisées pour la chasse. Vous êtes sensible à ça, si j'avais
ben, on est sensible à ça. Le but, c'est de sortir le plus possible les armes qui ne servent pas à la chasse. La chasse, on est pour ça, la chasse.
Madame Bibeau? Kody, I want to get your take on what's happening with the gun legislation. I mean, tell me what you're hearing from people in your riding. Tell me if you have any concerns about what's going on.
Yeah, look, I do. I represent Kings Hants, which is primarily rural riding. I think a couple of the issues are the miscommunication around the amendment in particular. So when you actually go and look at Amendment G46, it lists hundreds of guns, some of which are not actually being prohibited. But it's the level of detail in those actual amendments. So if you read certain clauses, it will say the following guns are banned, X, Y, Z, except for, and then it lists a whole bunch of guns. So there's been a lot of confusion when hunters call and we go talk about it. We're telling people to go look at the list. They're seeing their gun, of course, automatically being concerned about that, and then not actually recognizing that it's actually being exempted. So that has caused a lot of confusion. I would certainly encourage any role that the media can play to help quell that is important. Second piece is around the evergreen definition, which is G4. There is words around capable and designed, and that is causing massive confusion because I have hunters that are calling to say, well, my Remington rifle is certainly capable of taking more than 5 cartridges in the magazine. But it's only designed for 5, so therefore it won't be captured. But people are reading the first element of the definition that says capable and automatically are thinking, uh-oh, my hunting rifle is being impacted. So I think that clarity, it's very technical. I think that needs to come out, and hopefully we'll see that in the next couple of days to make sure that we do get it right. I'm certainly pleased to see that Minister Mendicino, along with the Prime Minister, have made very clear that this is not the intention of the government. But I think obviously the amendment as it stands right now needs to be amended or it's going to be problematic.
How did it happen then? I mean, do you put that on the fault of Minister Mendicino, the department? I mean, this massive confusion seems to have been something that could have been avoided if this had been handled with a bit more clarity.
Sure. Look, I don't sit on public safety. Obviously, I think moving forward, we have to make sure that it's clear that we are not, that there is not going to be impugning of rifles and shotguns that are going to be impacting hunters. We've made that promise right from day one, and as a rural member of Parliament, my line in the sand has always been I will support the government on the assault-style weapons, AR-15, etc. On handguns, I actually supported the idea of doing a national ban as opposed to municipal level, but my line in the sand has always been hunting and rifles. So the way the amendment reads right now is problematic, but I have confidence that it's going to get sorted out and we'll be able to move forward in an important fashion.
Was Rural Caucus consulted? Did you know that these amendments were coming and what was about to hit?
Look, I think I'll leave that to Mr. Chang to talk about the amendment and the government's position writ large. I think obviously the government had been very clear that it wanted to enshrine this in law. And that's what I think is really important as well. When you go to G46, the first 307 pages is not new. This is order in councils that have been started in the 1990s and also in 2020. So really, there's a lot, there's a lot there. That's not actually being anything new, and so that needs to be very clear as well. The government is seeking to actually enshrine this in law such that it would take a majority of Parliament to walk back what the government thinks is sensible gun law.
Have you seen any demonstration that there are indeed some some hunting rifles that could be captured by this?
I've looked at the list. I think that there are some, and I think that we are going to have to make adjustments and amendments along the way. And I think the government has been very clear on that. Minister Mendicino, along with the Prime Minister, have said that if there are rifles or shotguns, that is not the intent, and we'll get it right. And so I think that's really important, and that's a message that needs to be brought forward. So.
In the next couple of days, you said you expect changes in the next couple of days. What do you mean?
I guess what I'm saying is the committee is going to continue its work. I don't know if I did just say the next couple of days, my apologies. I guess what I'm saying is over the next period of time, what I'm hoping for is that we can make very clear what I just mentioned to you, which is this is very nuanced. We're encouraging people to go look at a list where there are guns that are named but not actually being prohibited. And that level of confusion, I think, needs to be detailed publicly so that when we're telling people to go see if their gun is impugned, we have to mention that your gun might be named, but you need to read the real fine print to see if it's actually being exempted. So it's how this has been drafted. I don't pretend to be a Department of Justice lawyer. These things are difficult, they're hard, but that's what I've noticed is that I've had constituents call that are explaining explicit gun models. I go look at it, and then when you read the fine print, it's actually being exempted. But you know, if you don't have, you know, this is the challenge of something that's very detailed and nuanced.
Should it have been handled differently altogether then? Not jammed in as an amendment at a committee with, you know, no opportunity for meaningful legislative scrutiny? And
look, I mean, I think that's a question for the minister. And the reality is, I think the government is trying to move forward on reasonable promises that it has. This is always tough. You know, there are sometimes challenges when we're talking about sensible gun legislation and that balance between protecting public safety, but also trying to make sure that we protect hunters, farmers, those that use firearms for whether or not protection of property or, of course, in some cases, in the Indigenous case, actually food. So this is not easy. I'll leave that to someone else to decide. At the end of the day, what my position is that we need to make sure that we get this right before we move forward. As it stands right now, there are problems with the amendment, but I'm confident we'll get it cleared up, that the government will be part of that, and that's what will help be able to make us move forward.
Can we get your thoughts on the company owned by China that has a contract with the RCMP? It appears that there are issues with security. The government's being called on to cancel this contract should that be happening.
Not familiar with it explicitly. I don't pretend to be unaware of a lot of things. There's a lot of things going on as a parliamentarian, so I've heard it in the House. I'd have to get more details before I give you a concrete answer.
Just on the face of it, the idea that the RCMP has contracted a radio communications contract to a company owned in part by the Chinese government, I mean, shouldn't that be cause for concern while we're saying we're going to be tougher with China?
I think the world has fundamentally changed in the last year when we look at our national security, whether it be obviously first and foremost Russia with the invasion into Ukraine. I think we need to be mindful of that relationship. The Indo-Pacific strategy certainly mentioned China as a more troublesome partner, perhaps, I guess, would be the language that is used or kind of signaled. So I think it's certainly something that we need to look into and make sure that there's proper practice in place.
Bonjour tout le monde. Les résidents permanents sont un réservoir de main-d'œuvre important de notre pays. Et comme j'ai annoncé lundi, ils peuvent être membres de forces armées canadiennes maintenant. C'est important pour le recrutement, mais aussi pour avoir une force armée canadienne moderne, diversifiée et inclusive. Permanent residents are an important pool of skilled labor. And as I announced on Monday, they can now become members of the Canadian Armed Forces. This is important not just for recruitment, but also to ensure that we are building a modern military that reflects the diversity and the inclusiveness of our country. Maintenant, je peux répondre à vos questions.
Should the RCMP be uninstalling the equipment that Hytera Communications has installed?
I know that my colleague, Marco Mendicino, is looking at this carefully. That falls within his portfolio.
Where are we sitting in terms of the military intervention or leading the military intervention in Haiti? What's the update?
As you know, we have provided support and transportation for getting military vehicles down to Haiti. We also sent a recce to Haiti to gather information regarding potential contributions that we could make as a country. We are studying those contributions, potential contributions, and we will have more to say on that.
But the recce team has been back for over a month now.
In short order. That is true, but at the same time, we are making sure to be prudent in this situation. We are making sure that we are in touch with, for example, Bob Ray, our ambassador to the UN, and as I said, we'll have more to say on that in the future.
There have been calls for comments on Dany Fortin's acquittal and the fact that he said he wasn't given due process by the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces.
I won't comment on a specific case, but I will say that our changes to culture in the Canadian Armed Forces are of the utmost importance. and we need to continue to ensure that all leaders represent the very best of Canadian society and, in fact, exemplify the principles of integrity and honesty and excellence.
Do you think you should have returned
the wasted dose of million wasted dose?
Pourquoi est-ce que the top 15 have been having trouble getting visas? This was an issue during the AIDS conference. Why is this happening again?
So our approval rate is now above about 95% for the COP15 conference. We've worked very closely with the organizers to make sure that regardless of where an applicant comes from, we have the opportunity to give them a fair consideration, and we've relaxed certain requirements because we wanted to make sure that kind of consequence didn't happen again. We've now approved more than 3,000 applications for people who are seeking to come here. The vast majority of people who've not yet been approved, frankly, have not been approved, not because there's a problem with their application, but because they've applied after the deadline. About 600 of those approvals actually were for applications that were received after the deadline, and we're still working to process them. But those who've applied in a timely way have actually had an enormously successful experience when you look at the approval rate, now in excess of 95% as a result of the changes we made and our decision to work very closely with the conference organizers. We're going to keep working through the applications. We encourage everybody to apply as soon as possible if you haven't, because if you apply the day before you intend to travel, of course, that presents certain challenges. But what we've seen is a massive increase in the approval rate when we've worked very closely with the organizers to change the process.
What changes were made?
I'll come back to this in a moment.
Okay. Last question. What changes were made?
So we worked with the organizers to say if the organizers of COP15 actually have a registered delegate, that we were relaxing certain requirements we would normally put in place that require somebody to demonstrate around just the ordinary visa requirements on things like likelihood to return, some of the requirements about being able to support yourself when you're here. We are working with the organizers who are vouching for these people, and we're dealing with a partner here, the United Nations, that's running the Conference of the Parties for the conference. And what we've seen is we're able to reliably grant visas to people that are registered as delegates officially with the conference, and it's really proven successful. So we're going to continue to learn lessons on the heels of this conference to figure out what we can do in the future to make sure we continue to enjoy a high approval rate. Sorry, I did promise to get back to this question. C'est possible pas plus long, juste parce que c'est difficile pour moi.
Bien sûr, hier vous avez parlé de cohésion sociale. Pourquoi faut-il se préoccuper grandement de la cohésion sociale lorsqu'il s'agit de l'immigration francophone hors Québec, mais que lorsque on parle de cohésion sociale au Québec, que c'est les mots du premier ministre Legault, eh bien là, ça divise et c'est pas une bonne chose.
Ok, c'est possible pour moi de parler anglais, juste pas de réponse. Okay, merci. So look, this may also be an issue that's very important in Quebec. My testimony yesterday was specifically about immigration outside of Quebec, but I've given a similar response after I was asked a similar question when we tabled the immigration levels plan in early November. What I think is really important is that everyone sees an opportunity for themselves, their families, and their community to continue to experience life in their language of choice, in their communities. I understand coming from a small community, when we see large ambition on immigration, there's a tendency to think that that's going to result in growth in urban communities and not rural communities. When I talk to my Francophone colleagues, it's extremely important that they and their constituents continue to be able to live life in French. C'est essentiel pour les communautés francophones de vivre leur vie dans la langue de leur choix. C'est très important parce que si les plus grands nombres des nouveaux arrivants incluent juste des anglophones, ce n'est pas acceptable pour des communautés francophones.
Right, but why this difference between when we use this word for the rest of Canada and when we use it for Quebec?
Oh, yeah, well, look, yesterday it was only because the subject of my testimony was immigration outside of Quebec.
But we still use that word.
Which word?
Cohésion sociale. Social cohesion. You said that it's important for Francophone outside Quebec, but why is it not the same for Quebec?
So I don't mean to suggest that it's not important for Quebec to have Francophones come to Canada, including in Quebec.
Would you also use the same word for Quebec?
The word social cohesion? Well, I think it's important for Quebec to see that there are Francophones coming both inside Quebec and outside Quebec. In fact, the provincial government in Quebec has indicated they also want to see that we continue to embrace Francophone immigration outside of Quebec. But certainly, c'est difficile avec le gouvernement provincial au Québec juste parce que les décisions pour choisir des nouveaux arrivants est une décision pour des gouvernements de Québec. Nous avons le rapport Canada-Québec et le gouvernement provincial a le pouvoir pour choisir chaque nouveau arrivant économique et pour mettre les niveaux d'immigration. Alors, it's a tricky subject, not because of political sensitivities, but because the jurisdiction lies with the province of Quebec to select which newcomers come to Quebec under the Canada-Quebec Accord. So the reason that I was focusing on outside of Quebec and the reason that was the subject of my testimony, is because of the jurisdictional ability for the federal government to welcome newcomers outside of Quebec. But that decision is a decision for Monsieur Legault's government and for the provincial government under the terms of the Canada-Quebec Accord.
Just a quick question. In less than a month, Pakistan says it's going to kick out Afghans who don't have papers or throw them in jail. What is your government doing to help bring them over here, the ones who are still waiting for their applications to be processed?
So there's a number of different things. We're continuing to work closely with officials in Pakistan. I recently met with the High Commissioner to flag our interest in making sure that people who are destined to come to Canada continue to have the ability to come to Canada. We are also working to have chartered flights arrive, including from Pakistan. Some have arrived recently. There will be more in the weeks ahead to continue to welcome people here. The people that we made a commitment to who are in process, we are not going to go back on our commitment to them, and we're going to work very closely with partners in the region, including Pakistan. Previously, we had a challenge that we worked through with the officials in Tajikistan to continue to have people come here. We're very, very closely watching the potential for people to potentially have negative consequences come as a result of decisions taken by third-party partners. But we have a very collaborative working relationship on this issue. We're not going to give up on a single person who we've made a commitment to, and we're going to do everything we can to get them here in as timely way as possible.
When you say flagging your interest to the High Commissioner, how did the Commissioner respond?
They want to work with us. There's a number of different issues. He's indicated to me that they want to make sure that they don't create a situation where people who are seeking to flee Afghanistan assume that there's an opportunity, regardless of where they're destined to finally, to simply enter contrary to the ordinary rules into Pakistan. But we're dealing with a unique population of people who are destined to come to Canada under the special measures that we've advanced, and we're working with the officials from Pakistan to do whatever we can to make sure that those people that we've made a commitment to bring to Canada do in fact get to come to Canada at the end of the day.
Juste sur les commentaires des conservateurs hier, durant la période de questions, ils étaient, je pense, fâchés, quelque chose que vous avez dit. Est-ce que vous pouvez expliquer qu'est-ce que vous avez dit et pourquoi?
Écoutez, moi, ce que je tiens d'abord à vous dire, c'est que j'ai énormément de respect pour la vérificatrice générale et pour l'indépendance des institutions. Puis je remercie la vérificatrice générale pour son rapport, puis qui vraiment venait confirmer l'importance et l'urgence des prestations qu'on a mis en place pendant la COVID. Cependant, on a commencé le travail de vérification, puis au niveau des chiffres, on ne s'entendait pas nécessairement avec les chiffres que la vérificatrice générale avait mis, mais le travail se fait à l'Agence du revenu. On va faire notre travail avec rigueur pour faire en sorte de récupérer les sommes qui ont été perçues par des gens qui probablement n'auraient pas dû recevoir des prestations.
Vous entendre sur ce qui se passe au Musée des Beaux-Arts en ce moment. La sortie de M. Maillard, notamment, il dit que c'est un scandale ce qui se passe. Vous, en tant que ministre, comment vous sentez interpellé? Pouvez-vous intervenir?
Bon, c'est une société qui est indépendante, on le sait, mais j'ai écrit une lettre ce matin à la présidente du conseil d'administration en lui exprimant mon inquiétude, ma profonde inquiétude, et en demandant une réponse rapide sur les solutions que le conseil d'administration va mettre de l'avant.
Vous, c'est quoi qui vous inquiète précisément dans la situation?
Le climat. Le climat comme tel. Alors, ce que je veux, c'est une réponse du conseil d'administration à ma lettre, savoir exactement comment ils expliquent ce qui se passe et quelles sont les solutions pour aller de l'avant.
Certains disent, comme M. Meillard, par exemple, dire que c'est plus une question artistique qui guide, c'est une question idéologique, par exemple, par rapport aux questions des Autochtones.
Bien, je vais attendre les réponses à ma lettre.
J'aimerais que vous me nommiez une chose pour le Québec dans le projet de loi C-13. Le projet de loi, une chose qui répond aux demandes du Québec dans le projet de loi C-13.
Oui, deux, je peux vous en nommer beaucoup, là. Mais la capacité pour un francophone de travailler dans sa langue. Et le fait que l'on donne des services dans des institutions qui sont de juridiction fédérale en français. Ça, c'est fondamental, c'est différent.
Ça n'existait pas déjà,
non. Ça, c'est fondamental, que les francophones puissent travailler dans leur langue et la langue de service puisse être donnée en français. Alors, on utilise une loi qui est de notre propre juridiction pour intervenir dans notre propre champ de juridiction pour promouvoir le français et défendre le français.
Pourquoi le gouvernement refuse-t-il, il refuse absolument là, de ne pas donner le choix entre la loi sur les langues officielles et la charte de la langue française aux entreprises de conférence fédérale au Québec, va leur donner le choix plutôt que de forcer la charte de la langue française?
Mais c'est-à-dire que là, nous, ce qu'on souhaite, c'est que ça se fasse dans les champs de juridiction qui s'appliquent. On est prêt à travailler avec Québec, discuter avec Québec. D'ailleurs, il y a des discussions entre le ministre Robert, Jean-Petit Taylor. Moi, je suis tenu au courant de ces discussions-là. Je pense qu'on peut très bien discuter et collaborer ensemble là-dessus.
J'ai une dernière question. Je sais que c'est pas votre territoire. Il y a une élection partielle en Ontario. Pierre Poilievre, maintenant qu'il est chef, avec la personne qu'on connaît, pensez-vous de quelle façon est-ce que vous pensez que ça peut changer dans l'opinion publique pour les résultats de cette élection-là?
Bien, ça sera évidemment aux gens de déterminer. Moi, je pense que M. Poilievre arrive à polariser pas mal. On verra ce sera quoi le résultat.
Merci.
So we were just talking about Pakistan, and you said you had spoken to the High Commissioner. They agreed with you that they do want to let the Canadians in process, those in process to come through to Canada. What do we understand by in process? Just because we have spoken to people who keep getting told your application is still, we're still working on your application, please be patient, but like, are they going to be protected from being kicked out of Pakistan or being thrown in jail or not?
So I want to be careful not to speak for Pakistani officials. I think ultimately there are issues within their jurisdiction that are their decisions, but it's incumbent upon me to work closely with them to indicate what our concerns are to see if we can identify solutions. Some of the solutions might involve us being able to facilitate the applications for people to extend their stay. There's different challenges depending on the individual applicant. Some of it is financial concerns if there's an application fee. Other concerns include the accessibility of the application depending where they are in the country, their ability to access online applications. So there's no one solution that solves the problem for every single person, but we have to continue to support the individuals who have made an application through the process that are somewhere beyond having indicated an interest in coming to Canada, but actually are one of the individuals who has an application number to come to Canada under the different measures that we've announced. We're going to continue to work very closely with our counterparts in Pakistan and frankly other countries in the region as well that have similar challenges to ensure that the people who have made an application to come to Canada and have been accepted into the program but are not yet here continue to have a pathway to resettle permanently in Canada as a refugee.
What are the logjams in regards to the Pakistan government?
So it depends on the individual applicant. Some of the individuals who came into Pakistan have been there longer than an ordinary permission to enter the country would have permitted them to be there. Those are individuals that Rafi had indicated might be subject to being removed from Pakistan under the normal rules. We need to make sure that we work with the Pakistani officials to identify the people who are destined to come to Canada, to work together to find a solution for each individual.
But I'm sorry, I still don't understand. When you say you identify the individual, so is the delay happening because the Pakistan government can't determine who is a legitimate applicant and who isn't?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Could you just reframe the question?
You're asking it's important for you to work with the Pakistan government to identify individuals who may be at risk, I guess, of being evicted or from Pakistan. Is then the concern, the delays related to the actions of the Pakistan government? Because I'm not clear as to what you're saying.
Which delays are you referring to?
Delays in processing and getting the Afghan refugees who are already accepted.
No, so there's a number of different aspects to, but from the time a person makes an application to come to Canada and their actual arrival.
But the individuals in the IOM hotels are already basically pretty far along, maybe waiting last steps, right?
Sure.
Right. What are their delays due to?
So it depends on the individual applicant. Right now, it could be something around the charters that we have scheduled making room. Each charter has around 300 spaces on it. We tend to have charters arriving from different parts of the world. on more or less a weekly basis. There's actually one arriving coming this weekend. We're going to continue to make sure that every individual who's in there, and keep in mind that this entire initiative includes 40,000 people, so moving them instantly is not something we can deal with right away. But whether it's finding space on them for the charters, whether it's going through the individual application that might be more complex because of specifics on the individual case file, might be working with the settlement sector in Canada to make sure that they're ready to receive people. There's a number of different factors at play that can lead to the timelines for an individual application actually reaching Canada.
November, sorry.
Maybe after this one I'll have to go, but I will make myself available if you need me to come back.
We've spoken to one individual in particular who's so concerned about his whole family getting thrown in jail at the end of this month that he's resolved to move back to Afghanistan to avoid that. His life is going to be in danger when he's back. He's a former Canadian military interpreter. His application process is still not through. He keeps getting told, please be patient. What does that say about the state of how fast you guys are working? This man's about to put his life in danger.
It communicates to me that there's real urgency to the process for every applicant who's coming to Canada. We know that the situation in Afghanistan is extraordinarily dangerous for a large number of people. We've been doing everything we can to make sure that we're resettling people as quickly as possible. With more than 25,000 people who are already here now, we're more than on pace to meet the stated target of getting the 40,000 by the end of next year. But when I hear individual cases like that, it strengthens my resolve to move more quickly. We'd be happy if you want to share details. Obviously, I can't discuss individual case files without the consent of the individual, but if you want to send details to me and to our office to make sure that we're on top of the individual case file, that's something I'd be more than willing to do. I do have to run back in case there's commentary. Sorry, I really do have to go. I'll come back if you want to. Sorry, I really do have to go. I'll come back if you want to follow up after the caucus meeting. Thank you.